I'd like to discuss Paul Levy's work at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, or BID. At the end of 2001, the BID approached Paul Levy to take over their operations of the medical center. Their finances were in a disaster. They were losing tens of millions of dollars every year. They had made bad business decisions, and their management simply wasn't working. Surprisingly, it even got to the point where they seemed to be paralyzed within their own group, where they would make plans to change the organizations, but they would never carry out their plans. And even when presented with business opportunities, for example, the Harvard Medical Center wanted to cooperate with them in opening a research facility in their property, they didn't seem to be able to make that decision. One thing that I found interesting in the hiring period, the 2 months at the end of 2001, is Paul made basically a litmus test for the board of directors to see if the organization was functioning enough where he could make these changes. And one thing he asked was to hire me by the beginning of January. Basically, he felt if the board could not come to that decision within 2 months, they were really dysfunctional. He also wanted to know how willing they were going to be to change, and he put in sort of two criteria. One was that the board must stop interference in the day-to-day operation of the hospital, and the other one was they would agree to look at the possibility of reducing the board from about the current 44 members down to 18 or 15. And finally, he said, I want to start before the Hunter report comes out, the report on the condition of BID. And they said, well, if you wait till the Hunter report comes out, then maybe we can disavow the report if it's not very good. And he says, no, we need to take responsibility for that report. If the report is going to come out, we are going to work with it. Needless to say, Paul was hired, and on January 7th, he actually started. He also found out a little bit of a surprise after he was hired, that the holding company that holds BDI and the Massachusetts Attorney General, who is responsible for charitable organizations in the state, had come up with a plan to sell BDI and use the proceeds to set up a nonprofit endowment. This basically would transform BDI completely. It would no longer be a research institute and no longer have Harvard affiliation. It would simply become a community hospital and a for-profit hospital. And he said, no, wait a minute, give me a chance. Let's see if we can make something work. And the AG said, okay, Paul, we will give you 6 months. If you can come up with a plan and show that you can turn this organization around, then we'll take this off the table. I'm going to give you a spoiler. It was successful. In those 6 months, 5 of the 6 months he had a positive cash flow, which was the first time in years, and 2 of those 6 months he actually was making profit. And so it was successful. And one of the reasons I wanted to sort of skip the history here is to really go into a breakdown of how he solved for these problems. So one thing is Paul's understanding of organizations. He understands intuitively that they are complex. And he really works with this complexity to his advantage. One of these things is within the hierarchy. Okay, every point in that hierarchy, people have a particular function and a particular job to do. The board has a particular function, which is why they don't interfere in day-to-day activities. His CFO, his COO, and his chiefs wanted to be part of the steering committees he was forming, and he says, no, this is not your role. You have a different function within the organization. He also understood the problems of scale. When he was setting up the steering committees and task force, he, of course, naturally wanted to make them representative. Unfortunately, if he makes them representative, perfectly representative, they're too large and they simply don't function. If he makes them too small, they don't have enough diversity or enough knowledge to really be able to solve for the problems they need to do. So he worked very, very hard at making compact, effective steering committees and task force. And then the other thing he realized is he had to build relationships across these organizations, which had basically been fractured. He wanted administrators to work with medical staff. He himself built a relationship across with the presidents of the different member hospitals within the group. And specifically, he understood BID as an organization. Its nature as a for-profit was critical. Its clinical functions were also very, very critical to its business, particularly its income. But it was also a research and academic hospital, and this was very important to its image. Nursing, he felt, was sort of the foundation of the organization. It was its brand, if you will. And then he understood that this organization belongs to a community. Not only does it belong to a local community, it also belonged to a generational community, and it belonged to a hospital and academic community. And these are really what makes BDI BDI, and he wanted to preserve those things. Communication. He was really a great communicator. He really understood the functions and the objectives of communication. Now, obviously, giving information is the function of communication, and he shared that information. He shared the Hunter report. He gave updates. He also informed staff about their plans, and he communicated up and down the hierarchy. One of the difficulties with the care group was there was no CFO, so there was no real direction. But he decided to bring in a group of presidents in order to get communication across the organizations in this holding company working. But one of the great things about communication is it elicits inclusion and motivation. When he was communicating the Hunter report, he was also asking for feedback, and so this communication went both ways. He was sympathetic to the employees, and so with this communication, he was not only just including people in, he was also motivating people. And education is actually a form of communication. It is taking information and bringing it in through skills or knowledge through the organization. He did this himself personally with his plan. He had the CFOs educate chiefs on how to make a variance budget report, and he also opened forums for nursing. And he modeled his behavior in his communication. At one point, when he felt one of the chiefs was just not getting what he was trying to do, he not only modeled his how he should be communicating, but also how he should be thinking about his subordinates. He had a very low impression of administrators, but these are the people that we work with. These are the people that we hire and should trust. And finally, he understood his audience. He understood where his communication needed to go, whether that was internal communication or communication with the media. For example, when Mount Auburn decided to split off from the care group, he got out in front of the media to spin his own message, to get the correct information out there. Opportunity. He always saw opportunity. Some opportunities are temporal. When he got the news about selling BID, he understood if he shared that with people immediately when he got in there, he could shock people and get them to realize the actual situation that BID was in and to motivate them to work for it. The firings also were something that came out of the Hunter report but had to be done immediately. He only had 6 months to turn it around. He had a very short window of opportunity to actually do that. He couldn't wait. Other opportunities were long-term. His purchase of the Grover Hospital was something that he was looking for as a long-term opportunity for BID. But opportunities are also systemic. As he says, when he sees a vacuum, he likes to fill it. And so he created the President's Group to fill the vacuum in the fact that the care group had no CFO. He also made partnerships between the hospitals to find values about sharing services and that the hospitals had themselves. And so there was a systemic opportunities that he had taken. Decision making was really critical. All his decisions were informed. He took the Hunter plan, he modified it, but he was doing this out of information. He created steering committees and task groups. So he was always using analysis. When he didn't have information, he simply refused to make a decision. In the case of when Care Group asked for capital plans, he hadn't a capital plan, and he basically said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. We don't have the information in which to do it. He always was consistent, basically because these were informed, they were based on plans, they were clear in their direction, and so his decision making was consistent. He also delegated his decision making. He gave certain decision making to the board. He gave certain decision making to a CFO and COO. He gave certain decision making to his chiefs and to the committees. And it was always supported. He never went and made his own decisions, but rather builds consensus with groups, the president's groups, for example, about how to distribute their debt during the severance conversations. He suggested things, but never made a concrete decision. It was always supported. And he really understood people. He understood by sharing, you were giving people agency. By creating groups and trusting people to do analysis, to do work, you were giving them agency. He understood the value of morale. He sent out a number of memos explaining that he understood the problem with, for example, capacity, that everybody was overworked, and he really appreciated this and understood it and backed it up with saying, we have a solution coming for you. And this is really, he respected all of his employees all down the chain. And he showed his empathy for people's situation and how they felt. For the research community, he said that we are putting together a committee of very renowned scientists to help you organize your research. And so he really understood how people felt within the organization, which simply just had them support his own actions. And finally, I guess if we had to understand Paul Levy in general terms, he's a very systemic, logical thinker. He can think up and down and across organizations, and he's very rational that way. But he's also very open. There's a free flow of information. There's a flow of decisions, and it is a very open system. It is not people siloed making decisions for everybody else. He's flexible. He is willing to change. The AG was not very enthusiastic about breaking up Care Group and said, please don't do it, and he was fine with that. And ultimately, even though that he's working systemically, he is really letting people know that they're really individuals, and everybody, no matter where they are considered and part of the organization.